Welcome back to another episode of Sparkle on Substack with me, Claire Venus. I'm so excited to speak to Astrid today. So this is the very first time that we're meeting, which is always interesting to sort of have a little tea date and podcast. And I was just saying to Astrid, this is our world. This is the world on a random Tuesday afternoon in April. It's just about the end of April. And we've decided to podcast together. So I invited Astrid to come on the podcast and she said yes. And I'm so delighted that we'll be able to get into more of how Astrid has been using Substack and talk a little bit about her Substack course for business owners. But we'll start by just hearing from Astrid and about who she is in the world and the work that she does.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. It's so lovely to be here. And it seems that we've been in sort of the same universe for a while. So it's lovely to actually meet properly on Zoom for the first time. Right, so I am a mentor for small business owners, freelancers and creatives, and I support them to have a slower, gentler and more profitable business. So it's all about having a business away from the hustle, away from the productivity hacks, but that still supports you emotionally, mentally, and financially. And I work with these small business owners, freelancers, and creatives through one-to-one mentoring, but also through a group program that I'm currently running called Marketing Without Social Media. And I have a mini course on Substack for small business owners. And my Substack newsletter, which also has a paid component, is also a way in which I support the people who also crave a gentler, slower, and more profitable business.
I love that. I love that there's that line about more profitable, because I think quite often we feel like we've got to give something up to slow down. And I think that is partly a load of messages that we've absorbed growing up and through the working world, but partly we've been in this kind of space of, early in the morning until tea time working, and then where's the space for your brain to switch off? So we feel like we've got to fill that whole time. And there was definitely a shift for me when I became a mum, just in terms of how I manage my time, because I recognized I was doing a 24/7 job already in motherhood, and then I had to fit work in as well. So it had to be a space of balance and a space of understanding, well, we have the internet at our fingertips and therefore the world. And in that, there's a whole load of opportunities that our grandparents didn't have. And that feels really exciting and also can feel a bit overwhelming as well. So that kind of giving ourselves permission to slow down and to lean into that space away from the hustle is definitely right up my street as well, Astrid. That sounds gorgeous.
Yeah, I think you're right. With it seems that there's almost this opposition, right? Either you have a business that is financially viable and you are willing to be working all the time, or you want to, or have to in many cases, slow down. And that means that your business is no longer as financially viable, but you feel like, well, this is apparently the price I have to pay. And I would say that's definitely not the case. And I think it's a really exciting avenue and direction to take.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, just leaning into the messages that you've put across, I think I did come across your work firstly. I feel like I did come across it on Instagram, but you're not there now. And then now I'm signed up to your Substack. But I felt like there was always that permission slip, and it's called female-owned small businesses as well, isn't it? Is that just your Substack or like an arm of what you
Yeah,
do?
the Substack is called female owned, but my
It's the
business
Substack, yeah.
runs under my own name. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so primarily on Substack, it will be business owners who are female, business owners who are mothers, business owners that are looking for this balance piece within their work.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my mentoring as well, I work with people who identify as women. So that's kind of the niche. And I feel like there's so many, particularly women, who come to this realization because of motherhood, because of illness, because of life changes, that they just don't want to live and work in a certain way anymore, and that they are craving a different way of doing business and they just don't know how. And that's where I come in.
Yeah, and I mean, I love the title of I think it's a group program. You said that marketing without social media. And I feel like in itself, it's a statement and a question, isn't it? It's like, can we?
Yeah.
Is there a way? could we do that? But also it's an invitation, because when you read something like that, you think, wow, that would be nice. I think a lot of people, and especially as we've come to Substack over the last year or so, there was what felt like a mass Instagram exodus. And of course, it wasn't that. It was just people had reached a similar level of burnout with Instagram or frustration with Instagram or whatever it was at a similar time, and all kind of wrote about it on Substack at a similar time.
Mm.
And it was that giant permission slip to understand, what if we didn't have to be in all of the places? It's very timely for me because I've just had a co-working session which was about bringing focus to one online space in a very measured and creative way within a 6-week container. And it's a challenge more than anything. It's like, if you bring some attention to one online space,
Mm.
what would that attention look like, and why? Because I think, when you used to visit someone's website, like 6 different places to follow them online, you're like, wait, what should I do? How should I stay
Mm.
connected to someone, and how am I going to be receiving their best work? So I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about where the idea for that program came from, and is that part of your personal practice? And if so, how long?
Yeah, absolutely. So I need to get my dates right. I started my business a little over 5 years ago, and I kind of didn't question that I had to be on Instagram. And at that point, I think I was on Instagram, like personally, but it was mainly lurking and just following a couple of accounts of people who I'd gotten to know mainly through blogging, right? Like people who used to blog and then they went on Instagram and then I followed along with them. So when I started my business, it kind of felt like, well, this is what you do, right? If you run a business, you're also on Instagram. And it never really worked that well for me personally. I definitely also gained followers, and I think it helped when I started selling digital guides too. But I always felt like I never got the balance right between being on Instagram and sharing content and creating content and my own capacity mainly. And I remember reaching a point where I felt like I couldn't have like a cup of tea without taking a picture of it so that I'd have something to share on Instagram. Um, so I'd been experimenting with it in various ways, and thinking in terms of having set days. So I had like a Monday mantra theme that I quite liked. So I'd post like a mantra, usually sort of permission slip like that worked quite well. And then on Friday, I'd do like a happy list. And on Tuesday, I'd share about something I was working about and working on. But it just all felt like a lot. And then I scaled back. And of course, what happens then is that your reach and your engagement drops. So I was really going back and forth about this. And then in October 2021, I fell ill with severe clinical depression. And at that point, I'd actually just decided to take a 3-week break from Instagram because I just launched a digital product. But with the depression, that break just extended itself for, I think, about five or 6 months before I started thinking again about, oh, right, there's this thing called Instagram. And at that point, I thought, I don't miss it at all. And when I started to get back more into my business as I was recovering, I realized that I didn't want to add Instagram back. And I started thinking about what else could I use? And I'd already started thinking about things like Pinterest and experimenting with Pinterest and doing more with SEO and having my newsletter work harder. So in, let's say, early or spring to summer 2022, that's when I kind of emerged from the dark and thought, I'm not going to be on Instagram anymore. And I posted a message telling people that they could come find me elsewhere, and went on from there. And I noticed that it has not had any negative effects on my business at all. And that since that point, so over the past 2 years, my business just continues to do really well, is growing. And it's incredibly freeing to me. And it's not so much that I have anything against social media. I think if social media works for someone, then please, by all means. But this idea that we are playing a game that we never really know the rules, for. And I think that's a feeling that many people have, like thinking about the algorithm and how often should you post and should you do reels and should you do whatever. That feeling made me feel really bad. And I'm just happy that I don't have to deal with that anymore. And I started hearing other people speak about this so often as well. People who said, I'd love to leave Instagram or I'd love to leave social media, but I run an online business, so I can't. Um, and I started to challenge that. And in I think the early summer of 2022, I created a free resource, which was an email resource around moving your business away from social media. And that continues to do incredibly well. People keep signing up for it a couple of times a month. And from that, many more conversations emerged. And my newsletter posts and my blog posts on not being on social media always do really well. So that from that, the idea for the group program, Marketing Without Social Media, was born.
Oh, it's so beautiful to hear your personal story within that as well, Astrid, because I think we're constantly kind of filling in the gaps. I know the first podcast that I recorded for the Sparkle and Substack series, and back in season 1, I was so nervous, and it was my mentor. So they're called Leonie Dawson, and they'd had over a 2-year social media break. And I can't remember what it was on the podcast or before, before we started chatting. I was asking them about how that had felt and what the impact had been on their business. And they were like, no, it was nothing to do. It was nothing to do with the impact on my business. It was about mental health. And it was about actually like, I just need a big break and I don't know when I'm coming back. And their business continued to go from strength to strength. But from my perspective looking in, I'd presumed their business must have kind of taken a dip. I just had made that presumption. I just thought, well, how can we be having buoyant businesses if we're not constantly sharing our cups of tea, as you put it, like that's what people want. Like we've got to feed them what they want. So it was really interesting to me to have that conversation with Leonie. And also for the last little while, I've been very sort of playful around what I have Instagram for, because I feel like there's something in the creative practice that I have, which is kind of rooted in, I don't want to say mindfulness. I think it is like a slower pace of life. So it's noticing the small things that I just find really, really beautiful. And I would notice them either just me, I would notice them with my iPhone, I would make a video, and making a reel felt like an extension of that. So it felt like a gift for me as an artist, as a creative, but it also felt like there's nothing riding on this. I just want to put it out. And I did one yesterday about my digital detox. I had a week-long digital detox. And I thought it was beautiful. Like, I was so pleased with it. It didn't take very long to make. And of course, you just lose followers. And then Instagram doesn't push it out because I've not been online for 10 days or whatever else. And it's back to that gamification of what we're actually doing. And was that worth my time? I don't know. I did enjoy the process. But in
Yeah.
terms of my business, if I was being very focused, and especially when my daughter was very young, I just wouldn't have spent time doing it because it wasn't the most important thing to drive my business forward. And I knew that. So I do think there is this space of headspace, strategic headspace, but also playful headspace, and then the effect on our emotions as well, because obviously you end up gathering, it's a bit like if you walk down the beach with a big long cape and there's been a big storm and you'll just be collecting everything under this cape, and then you'll look behind you like, why am I dragging all of this along with me? And I just don't know that we need that much of everybody else's lives to be happy. I just think stepping out of my front door and seeing that the tulips are in full bloom is like the best it's going to get, like
Mm.
there's just so much in that, isn't there? And I really feel like there's a re-education of us as business owners, and also there's a re-education of our nervous systems that allows us to put it down and to leave, or to leave temporarily, or whatever, that it's worth leaning into, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I like what you said, is that you enjoyed it really as a creative practice. And I think that
Mm.
is absolutely reason enough. And I think as with any marketing channel, it's important to be intentional as well. But indeed, if you enjoy Instagram as almost more of like a hobby project,
Mm.
then by all means.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? And so circling back into Substack territory and the Substack that you have created, that you spend time on for your business, I know that it fuels your business because you've got it set up that way. Is it mainly focused on you and your business, or are there elements that feel more personal or more of a creative practice on there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I see my newsletter as part of my business, and that means to me that if we have almost a scale on which one-to-one mentoring is like the most intense way in which I can support people, or intensive rather, then the newsletter is at the other end of the scale. So there's still support, but it's relatively light touch. So what I do with my Substack newsletter, I've got 2 free newsletters a month, and then also for paid subscribers, there's 1 post, which is often a behind the scenes post, and we have an accountability club for paid subscribers and a monthly thread. I've got various kinds of threads that we sort of come back to, but it's essentially supporting other small business owners and freelancers and creatives. So it's definitely about lessons that I've learned and the kind of things that I run up against in my business, the kind of conversations I have with my clients, the things that keep coming back. So recently I released a free resource around taking up space, and that came from my own kind of reflections on launching my group program. And I think a launch is often a moment where we are confronted with taking up space, and having to grow in that sense, but also with conversations with clients about how do you take up space with your business and in your business. And that then feeds into the newsletter, and in this case, into a free resource.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And it sounds like it's very niche in terms of people can feel very held, like they know what it is, they know what they've signed up for very quickly. They get to know what that is. And you've got those regular kind of cadences of posts and threads where people go, great,
Yeah.
it's this again, I can chip in with that. And it's almost like that kind of club of feeling held in our business, isn't it? And that's totally possible to do with a Substack account. That's really brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's also something that people tell me, right? They really appreciate just the gentleness of the newsletter, but also the fact that it's so much about business done differently, and that they really feel that they are almost getting permission and an example and inspiration of how we can do business differently, and how we can do business in a way that allows us to be human.
Yeah, I think so. And I think over the last little while, we've had lots of messages that have felt incongruent around that. Like, people are like with the cocktails at the beach, it's like, oh, I just had a 6-figure launch back in the UK or whatever, all of this stuff that has kind of come into our ether where we're like, oh, yeah, how, And so actually the small steps of kind of showing up and going, this is what other people are feeling, and seeing this is what other people are writing about their businesses that month, I think is very, very comforting. I know with Sparkle on Substack, just managing expectations around when people go paid, because there's this big, obviously it's a big shiny carrot. It's right there, it's like, well, I could go paid. What would that be like? And so we do a lot of work and have a lot of conversations about, you've got to kind of work out what that is, because Substack tell us anywhere between sort of 1% and 10% is normal, with 10% of subscribers obviously being very high if they convert to paid. Average is about 3 to 5%. So you build in your free list for a long time before you're going to build up any sort of membership through the Substack network that makes sense, because it's going to be quite small to start with. And I think all of that knowledge and sharing about how things actually work is it's really, really helpful, because I think, yeah, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of stuff that is put in front of us that makes no sense, and we just feel like we're doing it wrong. I guess there's a vulnerability there, isn't there? And then
Yeah.
you and I know behind the scenes, not only does it take a little while to get to grips with how we want to run our own business, but also we're learning lessons along the way, week in, week out, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so your Substack course that you offer for small business owners and freelancers, I know, when we sort of first started talking about Substack as something that people could use outside of the writerly community, and I work with loads of writers and I adore them, but I kind of seen it as this space for creatives who also like to write. Just because that's who I am, and I could really see the potential in that. based on my experiences. And I know we were kind of working out, okay, like, can we educate about Substack? Is that okay to do? And if we do that, like, how do we set that up? And I feel like we did something really similar, like around the similar time to each other. And I was so pleased to see that you gave it this container of like, you can be a business owner on Substack, and this is this is how you're going to approach it. So I'd love to hear more about that product. Is it a course? Do you run it live? How does that work?
Yeah, so Substack for small business owners and freelancers and creatives is a self-paced mini course. And I launched it last year, May 2023. And it really came out of my own sort of journey of moving my small business newsletter to Substack. And before I did that, I did loads of research, also because I love to sort of dig deep into stuff that I'm excited about. So I'd really collected lots of examples and strategies and things I'd seen other people doing. And kind of also finding my way with what does that mean if you have a professional newsletter of any kind, right? What does it mean to have a business newsletter on Substack? And being not necessarily part of that sort of original focus of writers, but being a small business owner who also uses writing for their business. So that's where it came out of. And it's really a course that on the one hand teaches the foundations, so how do you set up your Substack, but then it's also really about how do you use Substack for your business, and both as a way of making people familiar with your business and driving sales and telling stories about your business. I think that's a really powerful thing that newsletters, and particularly Substack newsletters, can give us. And also, what are the options if you want to go paid? What are some really good strategies and best practices? And the course really resonated with people, and it continues to do so. And I'm currently updating it. So I did one update video, I think around October, because new features have been launched, and I had new ideas and new examples. And I'm currently working on another update video that also goes into, I won't call it a Substack overwhelm, but I've recently had many conversations with people who say, I love Substack, but how do I protect my boundaries? And I think that happens often when we are really excited about something. We have the honeymoon phase, right? When we are all over something, and then comes the, how do I protect my boundaries? Particularly when it's your business and you feel you need to be on all the time. So I've got that update video coming, and also a video that gives more of an in-depth view at my own Substack strategy and how I use Substack for my business, and also how I used it, for instance, in a recent launch. So that mini course is online, well, since it has been online for almost a year, but I'm relaunching it in May 2024 with those new videos. And yeah, I think it's going to be great.
Oh, great. So so by the time you listen to this podcast, that course will be
Yes.
relaunched and out in the world, but it's there now. And I think
Yeah.
so I did a 4-week course last March, which followed my Stay Creative on Substack masterclass. And I was like, I'll just literally put it out there, a 4-week drip fed course. And then just as that was all finished and recorded, Substack introduced Substack Notes. And I was like, oh no. So, and because of like life was so busy and pressured at that time, my daughter was very, very young, and not, not in nursery very much at all. So I was like, okay, it's fine, because actually there's a simplistic way with Substack that made a lot of sense when I was making those tutorials, that then now a year down the line is probably quite helpful to people. So I give it to my founding members on Substack, to my diamond members, and that feels like a true gift. And I have thought about what I might do with that course. My SEO is terrible on my website. Like, I've never spent any attention or given it any time. Like, I hold my hands up and say, and it is on my agenda for this year. So I thought, as I pick up the SEO, I could have a little bit of a think about that. But I called it Stay Creative on Substack because I felt there was a real opportunity for us to be creatives on Substack and for us to think about what we wanted to put out in terms of audio, video, photography, and how we wanted to use it as a creative outlet, which is what I was using it for. I didn't have a blog function on my website at the time because my website is powered through Podia, which is just an online course platform. They have introduced one now, but it just meant that there was this other filter with how to use Substack away from monetization, just in this kind of creative practice and giving yourself space to write and create. So I do like the course, I do really like that I created it and that it exists in the world, but it's always really funny, isn't it? Difficult when there are so many updates and there's a cultural shift as well. So at the time where we were first starting to kind of talk about Substack and to talking about how to use it, there weren't so many of our UK colleagues on there, and that all of that work had just kind of started really, and it was all rippling slowly, and then all of a sudden it just felt like there was a huge influx of lots of different types of people. And Substack professionals now say writers and creators, so there's been a marked shift from a platform for writers to a platform for writers and creators. And by creators, they mean people who were creating on social media and who want to try out Substack. So it's super interesting to me to just feel all of that and to feel what people are saying about the overwhelm, because there are still some quirky things with Substack that even if you'd spent as many hours on it as you and I have, you still might find a bit overwhelming. Like the notifications, for example, just
Yeah.
they are quite overwhelming, aren't they? They can be big,
Yeah.
long list. So yeah, I think there's something in how we approach and understand how our nervous systems are reacting to spending time on the platform and expectations around how well our posts might do or how well our communities might grow and all of that sort of space where we just got to be a bit careful with ourselves, haven't we?
Yes, definitely. And I think if you like, I love reading newsletters on Substack, right? But that also means that if I go into Substack to read a newsletter, I also see, in the notifications that I have, comments on a post that I wrote. And sometimes that is completely fine, but that is where the boundary between business and personal starts to blur. And on a Saturday morning, I'm just not that interested in being in business mode. So that is something that I'll also be paying attention to in that new update video, because I think that is also unique to using Substack essentially for work, right? For your business. You're not just doing it for fun, but also for business. And I think there's loads of opportunities to use Substack for your business. And at the same time, that also means that you need to protect yourself a little bit. And many of the people that I work with and that I attract in my business are people that are naturally more introverted, or perhaps get overwhelmed more easily, or at least they're the ones craving a slower way of being. So I think particularly for them, it's really important to think about how you can make it work without spiraling into overwhelm.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for the people that I've seen come and make beautiful Substacks and then leave, been because of Substack. It's hard to really know, in one way it's a victim of its own success in that it's great that it's given us new features and new ways with things, but when there are too many of those all at once and people aren't spending as much time on the platform as you and I might be because we're plugged in for work, it just becomes wholly overwhelming, and that's just really difficult when somebody really wants to just spend time with their writing and with their community. That's the kind of two areas of focus. So yeah, I do think it'll be interesting what we're able to do in terms of space holders around this notifications boundary setting, I guess, I think is what it is, because what I have to do is delete the app. So I delete the app completely off my phone, but that means that I'm missing out on reading newsletters. So my reading time is usually in the evenings anyway, but I've noticed that it used to be like Saturday mornings and it was quite nice, and I just can't because there's
Yeah.
just too much. And I think because people like to go on Substack on the weekends, then it would just mean that I was plugged into like the work version of myself, which around a launch or, around a particularly focused piece of work is maybe okay, but I definitely don't want that for myself every week. So that's shifted and changed. And also being on 24/7 in terms of the time zone. So once I built up quite a few members in Australia and America, it was like, well, I'm just on 24/7 here. Like there is no downtime, which was new for me because my audience on Instagram was always UK based. I had like a couple of American pals, but it was a UK audience. So you were chatting, and then you would go to bed, and I wasn't one of these where you would wake up to notifications. That just didn't exist before Substack. So yeah, so figuring out what my boundaries are around that, and then still being able to read for pleasure, because it is so pleasurable, like you say, to plug into these newsletters, to plug into this beautifully sophisticated writing, to see someone's approach to images or video or whatever else. So I think there's something really interesting in us just kind of working out what that bespoke approach is for us individually, isn't it? And what feels good, and bringing that to Substack and bringing that to our online way of being.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And so Astrid, I'd love to know a little bit more about what your goals might be for Substack. What you feel like one of the things that's cropped up recently in my calls is subscriptions are infinite, and that feels a big thing, to realize, okay, I'm setting up a subscription service. I've set up a subscription service. It's now been running for 2 years. Subscriptions are infinite. And so you get to see a little bit of the trajectory of that subscription service. But what are your goals with Substack? Do you have numerical goals? Do you have financial goals? Do you have goals around taking downtime and kind of months of the year off? Like what does it all feel like to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's kind of interesting how you mentioned about that subscriptions are infinite, because I had a conversation with a client who was thinking about adding a paid element to his Substack. And I said to her, you can always pause the subscriptions, the paid subscriptions. And I've seen people do that. And as a reader, I don't mind at all. I think it's all about, just as we need to communicate, what are we offering our paid subscribers? If we can be really, clear about, okay, I'm pausing now, completely fine. Anyway, my goals. So my community is growing, but my goal this year, I always had like numerical goals for my newsletter and also for the community. But this year, my goal is more to focus on nurturing the people in my community, because I find chasing the numbers to be something very human, and it's lovely to get that little hit of dopamine, when you've got new subscribers. But I've also noticed, and I don't know whether you noticed that as well, when you hit sort of, for instance, the 1 year mark, when you started offering paid subscriptions and people need to renew or not, you get sort of this bigger dip than usual, right? And that also made me realize just how little influence we have on whether people renew or not. So I try not to have numerical goals. So this year, I really want to nurture the people on my list. I am excited about doing more around community building. So last year, I introduced the female-owned accountability club, which means that at the beginning of the month, I post a thread for paid subscribers where they can share what they did last month and what their plans are for the coming month, and also how they'll take rest into account. And that is just such a lovely space. I find it completely magical that I put this thread out there and people reply, and then they reply to each other and you get conversations, and it's just amazing. We have the mini mastermind where people get to ask me questions, and I've now turned that into like once every 3 months, and the other months we'll have like a general discussion thread, usually around a topic that I set. And now a new feature is share, connect, and collaborate, where my aim is to bring people together that would like to either just promote their newsletter or a new product, or potentially connect and collaborate with other people. So that's very new, and that's also going to be a once every 3 months thing. So this is how I'm trying to really build that community around the newsletter. For my recent launch for Marketing Without Social Media, I also experimented with a mini podcast series, which because I kept coming down with colds, ended up with 3 episodes rather than 4 or 5. But what I really like is the idea of having sort of a casual private podcast for paid subscribers. And I want to start doing that after the summer, when I'll have a little bit more space in my program. And I think that will be the focus, and continuing doing what I'm doing. And last year, when I was so busy with setting up the Substack and the mini course, and then starting thinking about marketing with social media, I didn't get to create that many free resources, and I really love creating resources. So that's part of nurturing my subscribers for this year.
That sounds great. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, isn't it, to think about that pause for ourselves and then, just repeating that language to people and helping people to understand what a pause can be. Either you set it out at the start of the year if people are joining annually and you let them know which months you're offline, or like you say, you can press a pause button which pauses all the payments and stuff. So it is there and we can use it, and we can be really strategic and savvy once we understand our own energy. And I think the bit that's sometimes missing is what it's going to feel like, what it's going to feel like holding a community and it growing, weekly or monthly or however it grows. So it's a really interesting thing to take connection and advice on from people who are doing it like yourself. I love that. And I loved what you said about nurturing people within your community as well. One of the things that I have found is obviously people are so generous with their gratitude. So in just sharing how something like one piece of content or one tip of advice has impacted them, and then sharing that with other people. Obviously, we have the recommendations tool on Substack, which works brilliantly for people finding our work and for finding other people's work. But there's something about really spending time and that kind of depth of human connection with people who are on the same journey as us, and figuring out the subscription model. And maybe we've been there like a little bit longer, but it is still relatively new. It is still a relatively new thing to be plugged into a platform that does so many things for us, isn't it? So there was a question that I had that had cropped up in my community, and it's not cropped up in for a while, but there was a couple of my colleagues that had come on to Substack from Instagram, and one of them had a service-based business and one of them had a product-based business. And my advice was to just make sure that they didn't just do too much of the kind of sales type post when they were kind of setting up their Substacks. But both of their Substacks were flagged straight away. This was a while ago and taken down. And so the way that they kind of, well, one of them appealed it and it was fine. She runs an online shop, and the other one, it wouldn't have worked because it was too focused. When she looked at it again, she was like, oh no, it is actually too focused on services, and it's really clear that it's just focused on services. So I wondered if you'd come across that with people who've done your course, or if you had any tips for anybody, because I do get that question a lot, but since those two examples, it hasn't cropped up again. So sure.
So were they flagged for being for selling too much?
Yeah, so it just got pulled down straight away as like it was like a statement around, Substack doesn't allow Substacks that are solely based on product or service based businesses. So it was that was the phrase. And for my friend that has an online shop, she had put the blog posts on there, and then there was like a little link to her shop at the bottom, but there weren't sales posts, and they allowed her to come back on. And then the other one, which was like purely service based, and the way she'd arranged it all, it was kind of like a website. She was using it instead of a website. And so for her, like it was just definitely not the right place for it. So yeah, I just wondered if it had cropped up in any of your work, and if it had, but doesn't sound like it.
No, I haven't heard about that. And I think, I mean, there's so many people selling things on
Mm.
Substack.
Yeah, yeah.
And I also think if Substack wants to support people to make money, then they need to allow people to actually talk about how they make money, or
Mm,
to sell what they're doing.
hmm.
Um, I think in general, most of the small business owners and freelancers and creatives that I work with don't sell enough. I think
Yeah, yeah.
in general, we are too scared to share what we're doing. if you're setting up your Substack, I always recommend adding first a couple of posts. They can be old newsletter posts, so that your audience gets an idea about what you're doing. And I think that also helps to create more of a sense of the story around your business. And I think newsletters are about storytelling and at the same time being clear that this is not a hobby for us. But as small business owners, we're also here to make money. But that's interesting. I'd never come
Mm.
across
Yeah, and
people
maybe
being pulled
maybe
out.
they became more flexible since then, but it was like it happened to both of them um in quick succession. And I was thinking, I wonder if anybody else who's kind of supporting people with Substack has had this. So,
Yeah.
but maybe they've got a bit more lenient, or maybe, yeah, maybe it's less of a worry these days. Yeah, I'm not sure, but that's good though. It's good that everybody's been plain sailing in your community. That's really good to hear. And like you say, we have seen more inventiveness around sales, and I do think because if we do turn on paid subscriptions, we almost kind of get this practice of talking about our work, because I definitely at the start was thinking, well, I've filled in my 3 lines in the back office. I don't really have to say anything more. And then I soon realized, no, I need a whole page to explain what this paid community is. Like, I need to talk about it. I need to expand it all, because for some people, they'll be in, as soon as they see those 3 lines, they'll think, yeah, that's great. That's for me. For others, they need a little bit more
Yeah.
suggestion as to what that's going to look and feel like. And that's been relatively new to me. I think as a business owner, for the most part, I've been self-employed since 2008, but I've only been working on like selling products and selling what it is that I offer in the world relatively recently. A lot of it was just word of mouth to start with, and like a little bit on Instagram. So giving ourselves grace around the fact that it feels difficult sometimes to say, oh, hey, I've got a paid offering. This is what I offer. And also what I've seen, and you might have seen some of this as well, is kind of overgiving. So much value behind the paywall that if you saw it off Substack, it would be like hundreds and hundreds of
Yeah.
pounds, not just a kind of £60 a year subscription. So yeah, holding that model of value and what a subscription can be in your business, and understanding the difference between the two things, I think is it's work, it takes a lot of thinking about.
Yeah, and I always encourage people I work with to observe how they feel when they are reading someone else's newsletter. And also, we often feel like, oh, I'm selling again. I'm talking about what I'm offering again. But there's no one else on the planet who is as close to your newsletter or your business as you are.
Mm.
Even if like your parents are subscribed, they will not be reading your newsletters as carefully. And if I look at myself, even the newsletters written by people that I really appreciate, I miss things. So it's really important to remind people of something, because we are human and we have short attention spans. And I think we can do that in really gentle but effective ways.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so funny you should mention that, because quite often I feel like I've done such a thorough job, especially I've got a homepage challenge running at the moment. And I'm like, right, okay, like read it again, make sure it's super clear. And people will still ask questions that I've covered in the post. I don't mind at all, but I'm like, it doesn't matter how clear you think you've been. Obviously, people are just reading it the way that they want to read it. And then, of course,
Yeah.
there's that community element to ask questions. So it's part of it, isn't it? I think. Yeah, there's something about sitting with a Kindle, which I have just done on holiday, where I felt like I was absorbing every word in the way that it was intended, that I definitely don't have when I pick up my phone to
Oh,
read a Substack newsletter. I think we just have to be honest about that stuff, don't we?
yeah.
So, yeah, brilliant. Okay, Astrid, well, it's been so gorgeous to speak to you and hear all about how you are running your Substack and how it's plugged into your business as well. If people want to connect you on Substack, could you give us the name of your Substack and where else to find you online?
Yes, so my Substack is called Female Owned, and you can find me on my website as well, which is Astrid Bracke, which is my last name is Bracke, BRACKE.com, but I'll also make sure that you get the links. And my website is really the best place to also find out about the Substack mini course and to find out about the mentoring and the programs and all the lovely things that I'm doing. So thank you so much, Claire. I
Oh,
really enjoyed
perfect. Yeah, no,
this
that's
chat.
great. That's great. And I have really enjoyed that. I was just saying, like, just the other week, like I feel like I need more Substack colleagues. It can be quite lonely, to be navigating this space where you want to hold space for people. So it's been gorgeous for me to connect in and meet you for the first time, Astrid.
It was lovely. Thank you, Claire.
You're welcome.